I knew I was done the moment I saw HR sitting too close to the door. The conference room screen was already on. My name sat there in the center like it had been waiting. No agenda. No small talk. My manager didn't ask me to sit. He didn't ask anything at all. He just closed the door behind me and said he didn't accept what I'd done and that I had 1 week. I tried to speak anyway. That reflex you get when you still believe explanations matter. I started with the coffee. The old man. The lobby. 3 minutes in the morning. That was it. No favors. No conversations. Just a cup set down, a nod, and me walking back to my desk before my screen even went to sleep. My name is Calla Whitmore. I am 42 years old. That thought hit me right then, standing there while my manager watched me like I was already gone. 42 is old enough to know when a meeting isn't a meeting. 42 is old enough to recognize when a decision has already been approved somewhere else. HR slid a folder across the table. It was already open. My signature line was highlighted. I noticed security through the glass, pretending to look at their phones. I noticed my manager never once looked at me. He just repeated the line about policy, about optics, about how it didn't matter that the man never asked me for anything. What I didn't say out loud was that the coffee was already in an email, that someone had taken the time to describe my 3 minutes like a violation. What I didn't know yet was that the report had been sent before this meeting was ever scheduled. He turned the screen toward me then. A calendar, a date, the word termination written clean and calm like it was a dentist appointment. Approved, past tense. I stopped talking. There was nothing left to add. Somewhere in the building, the lobby clock ticked toward 7:13. I pictured the chair where the old man sat. Empty now, probably. Or maybe not. Either way, it didn't matter to them. This story is a work of fiction created by the writing team at Revenge AITA. As I reached for the folder, one thought kept looping, louder than everything else. And it was the first time fear actually settled in instead of shock if the decision was already made. Why pretend this was a warning? I didn't go back to my desk after the meeting. I stood by the copy machine because it gave me something to do with my hands. I kept feeding blank paper through it, over and over, like the noise might drown out what had just happened. Someone said my name. Soft. Careful. It was Jenna. She worked my shift when I covered nights last winter. She didn't meet my eyes. She never did when things were about to go wrong. She told me the report didn't come from management. She said it fast, like she was ripping off a bandage. She said it came from the floor, from someone who saw me crossing boundaries. She didn't say my name after that. She just stared at the blinking light on the copier. I waited for the rest, an apology, an explanation, anything that made sense. She said layoffs were coming. She said people were being ranked. She said she didn't think it would go this far. Her voice cracked on that last part, like that was supposed to matter. I told her I covered her shifts because she had a kid at home. I told her it was coffee. I told her 3 minutes didn't change anything. She flinched at the word coffee, like it was a weapon. That's when it hit me how clean it must have felt to hand my name over and step back into line. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just walked away before she could say anything else that would stick. In the lobby, the old man was already there. Same chair, same time. 7:13 on the clock behind him. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the cup. I started talking, too fast, explaining policies like they were spells I could cast backward. He listened for maybe 10 seconds. Then he raised one finger. Not rude, not gentle, just final. Stop, he said. I kept going anyway. About the meeting, about the week, about how I didn't do anything wrong. He leaned forward then, closer than he ever had, and said I didn't need to convince anyone who'd already decided. Why would someone with nothing to lose tell me to stay quiet? He took the cup from my hands and set it down like the shaking annoyed him. People reveal themselves when they think no one's watching, he said, and looked past me toward the elevators. When I turned, Jenna was standing there, pretending to check her phone, waiting to see if I'd say her name out loud. I came down early the next morning, earlier than usual, like getting there first might change something. The old man was already in his chair, and he always was. Same coat, same posture, like time bent around him instead of the other way. I handed him the coffee and told myself not to talk. I failed immediately. I said I was drafting an email. Careful wording. Professional tone. I said I was going to explain context, intent, precedent, all the words that used to work when people still pretended to listen. He took a slow sip and asked if the review window was 10 business days or calendar days. I froze. I hadn't said anything about timelines. I hadn't said anything about reviews at all. He set the cup down and corrected himself. Like he was fixing a typo. Said it didn't matter anyway. Most places locked decisions by day 5. I laughed. A short, stupid sound. Asked where he worked before he retired. He told me manufacturing, then logistics. Then he paused and said consulting. Actually, the answers didn't line up, not even a little. When I pointed that out, he shrugged like it was weather. I told him I was sending the email after lunch. He leaned back and shook his head once. Not dramatic, just done. Said emails like that didn't protect people like me. Said they became exhibits. Said the tone would be used against me no matter how clean it sounded. I asked how he knew that. He didn't answer. He asked if I'd ever noticed who survived layoffs and who didn't. Asked who got to explain themselves and who just disappeared. Why was he trying to stop me from saving myself? I stood up too fast. My chair scraped. People looked. I didn't care. I said he was wrong. I said staying quiet was how people got erased. He looked at me then. Really looked. Not kind, not cruel, just accurate. He said sometimes silence wasn't surrender. Sometimes it was leverage. I told him he didn't get to decide that for me. He nodded. Like that was the point. Like I just passed or failed something and didn't know which yet. As I walked away, my phone buzzed. An email draft auto-saved. HR added to the thread. I hadn't sent anything. Not yet. HR called me back in before lunch. Same room, same folder, different energy. This time they didn't pretend it was a conversation. The woman across from me tapped her pen against the table and said my name like it was already past tense. She said my termination was effective immediately. She said access would be revoked by end of day. She said it wasn't personal. I asked why the meeting had been scheduled weeks ago. Her pen stopped. She said decisions like this required preparation. She said patterns mattered. She said my name had been flagged months earlier during a risk review. Not for performance. For friction. I asked what that meant. She said I asked too many questions. She said I didn't escalate properly. She said I pushed back in meetings where alignment was expected. She said helping the man in the lobby just made the paperwork easier. I laughed before I could stop myself. Not because it was funny, because it finally made sense. Another person came in then. Younger, too confident. He slid a document toward me and said the phrase swift resolution like it was something to be proud of. He said teams were being rewarded for decisive action. He didn't say the word bonus, but it hung there anyway. They asked me to sign. I asked about my file. They told me partner firms would be notified. Standard practice, risk mitigation. They didn't use the word blacklist, but they didn't have to. So what was the point of blaming the old man at all if I was already marked? No one answered that. They just waited. I signed because refusing would have changed nothing except how long they sat there. When I stood up, my badge stopped working before I reached the door. The lobby was quiet when I passed through. Too quiet. The chair by the wall was empty. No coat, no cup, no sign he'd been there at all. I paused long enough for security to notice. As I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. A system notification. Access terminated. Another followed right after. External contacts restricted. Whatever this really was, it had moved past me. I found out from the building desk. Not a phone call. Not an email. The guard stopped me before I reached the elevators and asked if I was here about the man from the lobby. He didn't wait for my answer. He said there'd been an ambulance earlier that morning. Said the chair was being cleared out. I asked when. He said yesterday. Early. I said nothing. He handed me a small envelope he'd been told to give me if I came by. No return address. My name written like someone had tried not to shake. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. Not finished. Not signed. Just words that stopped halfway down the page. He wrote about watching people choose. About how policies revealed more than character statements ever did. About timing. About patience. Then a line I read 3 times because my brain kept rejecting it. You weren't the first. My hands went numb. I leaned against the counter because the floor felt too far away. I asked the guard if anyone else had asked about him. He hesitated. Said a few names came up over the years of people who stopped coming, people who used to sit where he sat. He said most of them didn't work in the building anymore, said he never saw them again. How many people broke before I did? I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope, like that might make it less real. When I looked up, the guard had already turned away. The desk phone rang. He answered it like nothing had happened. Outside, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, no message. Just a missed call and a voicemail notification I didn't open yet. I stood there longer than I should have. Then my phone buzzed again. Same number. This time, a text followed. We need to speak. Not here. Whatever he left unfinished wasn't done with me yet. They showed up 2 days after the letter. I wasn't supposed to be in the building anymore, but my badge still worked on the side entrance. I told myself I was just grabbing a notebook I'd left behind. That was a lie. I wanted to see if my name was still poison. I heard the voices before I saw them. Calm. Measured. The kind that didn't rush because it didn't need to. 2 men stood near reception. Jackets still on, talking to security like they owned the floor without saying it. One of them asked for governance records. Another asked who had approved recent terminations. No one said my name. I stepped closer. Too close. A woman from legal caught my arm and steered me aside like it was instinct. She told me, quietly, that I shouldn't be there. She told me not to speak to anyone. She told me this wasn't about me. I laughed under my breath. That earned me a look sharp enough to shut it down. She lowered her voice and said, if I talked, even casually, I could compromise things I didn't understand yet. She said silence was in my best interest. She said my best interest had legal definitions now. What kind of justice requires the person who got burned to pretend nothing happened? The lawyers passed us without a glance. They didn't ask who I was. They didn't care. That hurt more than if they had. Then a third man came in through the front doors, younger, tired in a way that didn't come from missing sleep. He stopped when he saw the empty chair by the wall. He didn't ask about it. He didn't have to. He looked at me like he knew exactly who I was. My grandfather sat here, he said, not accusing, not gentle, just stating a fact that landed heavy between us. Legal went still. Security shifted. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't offer condolences. He just nodded once and followed the lawyers toward the elevators. The woman from legal let go of my arm. She told me to go home. She told me someone would contact me. As the doors closed, the younger man looked back, not at them, at me. And for the first time since this started, I knew for sure this wasn't finished. He asked me to meet him somewhere quiet. Not his office, not the building. A conference room borrowed from a law firm that didn't put its name on the door. He didn't offer coffee. He didn't sit until I did. He said his grandfather had owned enough shares to stop things. Eventually, not immediately. He said intervention without proof would have warned the wrong people. He said the company had learned how to clean itself whenever power moved too fast. I told him that sounded convenient. He didn't argue. He said it was cruel. He said it worked. He slid a folder toward me and didn't touch it again. Inside were notes, dates, names I recognized from old email threads that had gone quiet, people who had left suddenly, people who stopped replying. I asked if they were fired too. He said some were, some quit. Some took buyouts that came with silence. He said my record was clean. No warnings, no write-ups, just a few meeting notes where I'd pushed back on timelines and asked for clarification when everyone else nodded. Enough to mark me. Not enough to protect me. I asked why me. He said I sat low enough to be disposable and visible enough to be useful. He said helping his grandfather gave them the excuse they needed. He said my termination triggered a clause buried deep in governance language that allowed the board to suspend leadership pending review. What kind of system needs someone to be sacrificed before it can be fixed? I stood up. My hands were shaking again. But I didn't hide them. I told him I lost my job. I told him my name was flagged. I told him people stopped answering my calls. Like he didn't apologize. He said apologies didn't undo leverage. He said this was the part where it got worse before it got honest. He stood then. Finally, he said the review had started. He said executives were already lawyering up. He said my silence mattered now more than ever. When I reached the door, he told me one last thing. My firing had locked the process in. There was no going back for them. As I walked out, my phone buzzed. A new message from legal. Subject line cooperation parameters. The email from legal was polite in the way threats usually are. Cooperation parameters. Bullet points. Time windows. Words like non-disparagement and confidentiality stacked neatly like they'd never ruined anyone's life. I closed it, opened it again, closed it harder. The reporter didn't use my name. I didn't offer it. We talked through an encrypted app someone had recommended with a half joke about burner phones and paranoia. She didn't ask how I felt. She asked for timelines. She asked for language from emails. She asked how fast leadership moved once my termination was approved. I told her everything I was allowed to remember. And a little more. She paused when I mentioned the empty chair in the lobby. She asked me to repeat the time. She asked who else had been there. Her typing slowed. That's when I knew this wasn't small. My phone rang before the article went live. Legal again. This time, not polite. They told me I'd violated the spirit of our agreement. They said consequences were still being evaluated. They said settlements depended on trust. I said I hadn't signed anything yet. Silence on the line. Then a reminder about leverage. About how easily things could disappear if I made this harder than it needed to be. What good is protection if it only exists when you behave? The article hit an hour later. No headline about me. Just governance failures. Patterns. Words like systemic and deliberate. My inbox exploded anyway. Missed calls. Messages that didn't say my name but felt like they were shouting it. The younger man texted once. Just one line. You weren't supposed to do that. I typed back and erased it. Typed again. Erased again. Finally sent nothing. By evening, the tone changed. Legal didn't threaten anymore. They asked if I was safe. They asked if I'd spoken to anyone else. They asked if I was willing to clarify a few points for regulators who suddenly had questions. I said yes before they finished the sentence. When I put the phone down, my hands were steady for the first time in days. Outside, another unknown number lit up my screen. This one left a voicemail. It was from the board. They wanted a meeting. The board meeting didn't feel dramatic. No shouting, no slam tables. Just faces that had practiced neutrality for years and finally ran out of room to hide. They didn't thank me. That would have been strange. They didn't apologize either. That came later, in writing, reviewed by counsel, signed by someone who would not be there much longer. The chief executive was placed on immediate leave, not suspended, removed. The phrasing mattered. So did the follow-up regulatory fines, personal liability, barred from holding board seats for the next several years. I watched him process that in real time. The smile he used in town halls didn't survive the sentence. Human resources went next. The director tried to frame it as miscommunication. The word oversight got used. Then the audit summary came out and the room shifted. Investigations, termination, cooperation agreements. Her badge was deactivated before the meeting ended. The coworker didn't get a meeting. She got a calendar invite that vanished mid-morning. Restructuring announcement. Position eliminated. No farewell email. I didn't feel relief. Just something cold and quiet where anger used to be. The company agreed to penalties. Leadership replacement. Governance oversight. External review that would last longer than any of us wanted to think about. My lawyer slid papers toward me and waited. Settlement amount spelled out in full. Blacklist cleared by formal letter. Written apology acknowledging wrongful termination and reputational harm. It all looked very clean on the page. What does revenge look like when it isn't personal? I signed because it was smart, not because it felt good. When I stood to leave, one of the board members stopped me and said they hoped I'd consider returning once things stabilized. I told them no without raising my voice. Outside, my phone buzzed. The younger man again? Just a single word this time. Done. I didn't reply. I walked past the building without slowing down, already thinking about what came next and whether any version of going back would ever feel like anything other than pretending. The offer came through my lawyer. Reinstatement, same title, same pay band. A new manager. A clause that said we'd all move forward professionally. There was another clause. Permanent, non-disclosure, non-disparagement, silence. Forever. I told my lawyer no before she finished reading it out loud. My former boss asked for a meeting anyway. We sat across from each other in a borrowed office. No witnesses, no raised voices. He said the company had learned from its mistakes. He said my return would send a positive message. I said my name had already been used enough. He waited for anger or forgiveness. I gave him neither. I told him I was done negotiating my dignity for stability. He nodded like he understood. He didn't. The money landed 2 weeks later, enough to breathe, enough to reset. References came with it, carefully worded, legally clean. My record followed me again instead of running from me. I took a job in a different industry, smaller, less impressive on paper, the kind of place where people answered emails without fear, no lobby chair, no watchers, just work that stayed at work when the day ended. I ran into my old boss once after that, grocery store aisle. He looked smaller, older. He opened his mouth like he wanted closure. I walked past him. Here's what I learned the hard way. If a system needs your silence to function, it isn't fixed. And if keeping your job requires shrinking yourself, it was never really yours to begin with. I didn't win everything. I didn't keep my old life, but I kept my name, my boundaries, and the ability to sleep without replaying conversations in my head. If you stayed with me through this, little thank you. I know these stories hit close for a lot of people. If you've been through something similar, I'd like to hear how you handled it. And if you want more stories like this, you know where to find them. They lost their power. I got my name back. That's the end of it. The laughter hit first, sharp and confident. And then the $100 bill slid across the conference table and stopped in front of me. Vanessa Reed didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room was already quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after applause has just died and everyone is waiting to be told what to feel next. She leaned back in her chair, eyes moving past me toward the glass wall and the skyline beyond it, like I was already done. Buy a new suit. Marissa, she said, tapping the bill with 2 fingers. You'll be interviewing at second-rate startups tomorrow. A few people laughed. Not many. Enough. This was the meeting where she had just announced the company's first 9-figure profit year. The slide with the numbers was still frozen on the screen behind her. The room still smelled like coffee and catered pastries. My name was still on half the charts no one was looking at anymore. I didn't reach for the money. I watched it curl slightly at the edge where the air conditioning hit it. I thought about how fast things change when someone decides you're temporary. My name is Marissa Hale. I am 42 years old. The thought came to me the way facts do when your body goes cold before your mind catches up. Too old to pretend this was a misunderstanding. Too experienced not to recognize a setup when it finally stepped into the light. Ethan had taken the seat beside her without waiting to be introduced. Her son. His smile was polished. Ready. He was already nodding at people like this had always been his place. Human resources kept their eyes down. Someone on my team shifted in their chair and then went very still. I could feel the room deciding what to remember and what to forget. I picked up the bill and folded it once. Slowly. Not because I needed the money, but because I needed my hands to do something that didn't shake. In systems architecture, there's a term for what happens when everything depends on one careless decision. I let the silence stretch just long enough for her smile to tighten. You know what we call this. I said, keeping my voice low, level. A single point of failure. She blinked. Just once. Then the smile came back. Thinner this time. In the final moments before I stood up. Before the chair legs scraped and the room exhaled, it crossed my mind how certain she looked. How sure she was that power lived where her name was printed. A small note before I move on this story is a fictional work created by the writing team at Revenge AITA. Inspired by real dynamics, but not real people. I slid the folded bill into my pocket and pushed my chair back. As I walked toward the door, the only question that stayed with me wasn't about losing my job, but about what happens when the person who builds the system stops pretending it belongs to someone else. My phone buzzed before the elevator reached the lobby. The notification vanished as soon as it appeared, replaced by a red banner telling me I no longer had access. I unlocked the screen again. Slower this time. Email gone. Calendar blank. The company chat app logged me out and refused to let me back in. It felt less like a shutdown and more like a purge, fast and careless. By the time I stepped onto the sidewalk, another alert came through. This one from a former teammate. The message preview cut off after 3 words. When I tapped it, the thread disappeared. I stared at the empty space where it had been, then locked the screen. Power moves like that when it thinks speed equals control. I stopped walking and checked LinkedIn. My name no longer appeared under the company page. A few familiar faces were still there, smiling. Endorsed for skills I had taught them? I refreshed once. One connection dropped, then another. People I had pulled into meetings, defended during reviews, trained late at night, quietly pressed unfollow. A new email landed in my personal inbox, forwarded from someone who didn't add a name. The subject line was bland. The content wasn't. Effective immediately. Access has been revoked due to ethical misalignment. Ethical. The word sat there like a bruise. Not incompetence. Not restructuring. Something vague enough to stain without inviting questions. I pictured Ethan in the control room, sleeves rolled up, pointing at screens he didn't understand, telling someone to wipe everything tied to me. He liked clean starts, clean wins. He wanted my shadow gone so his name could sit alone on the glass. What does it say about a place when erasing a person matters more than understanding what they touched? My phone rang. A junior engineer I used to mentor. I answered. The line stayed open, silent. I waited, breathing on the other end. Then the call dropped. No follow-up. I opened my laptop at the cafe across the street and logged into something that still recognized me. A status panel flickered, hesitated, then loaded with warnings I hadn't seen before. Connections missing, bridges gone. The kind no one documents because they assume the person who built them will still be there. Ethan had moved fast, too fast. I closed the laptop without fixing anything and slipped the folded bill from my pocket onto the table beside my coffee. The noise behind me swelled as the afternoon crowd pushed in. Somewhere above us, systems were still running on habits and assumptions, unaware they had just been cut loose. The cafe Wi-Fi stuttered once, then settled. My laptop didn't. A warning banner pulsed at the top of the screen, waiting for me to acknowledge it. I didn't click yet. I opened a different window first, one that never lived on the company network. My own dashboard loaded clean, familiar, quiet. It asked for a hardware tap. I touched the key at my collarbone and watched the status lights line up the way they always had. No drama, no lockout, just recognition. A text slid in from an unknown number. Did they really cut you loose? I left it unanswered and pulled up the incorporation records. The name at the top hadn't changed in years. The address hadn't either. The signatures were still mine. The transaction engine sat where it always had, humming behind the interface everyone else took credit for. Requests queued, tokens validated. A few new warnings stacked themselves neatly along the side, each tagged with the same cause. Termination event detected. I opened the contract and scrolled to the section no one ever read aloud in meetings. The clause was short, blunt, and unchanged. License is revoked immediately if the technical representative is terminated without a signed 30-day transition of intellectual property. No loopholes, no grace period. The words didn't flinch. Another message arrived. This one from legal. We need to talk. The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I imagined the room on the other end. Voices overlapping. Someone asking how fast a system could be replaced if it wasn't actually theirs. What happens when a company finds out the engine behind its billion-dollar machine never belonged to it? I switched tabs and filed a standard notice with the licensing registrar. No commentary, no accusations. Just a change in status. Time-stamped and final. The confirmation came back almost immediately. My phone rang. I watched it vibrate against the table, then flipped it face down. On the dashboard, new deposits lined up and paused, waiting for an authorization that would not come from me tonight. I closed the laptop, stood, and left the coffee untouched. Somewhere across town, people were still erasing my name, unaware they had already crossed the line that made their next move impossible. The first call came from an engineer who didn't bother with greetings. His voice was tight, words clipped, like he was reading from a screen he didn't trust. "Transactions aren't failing," he said. "They're finishing." But nothing new is coming in. I let the silence sit. On my end, the dashboard confirmed it. Old requests drained out clean. New ones lined up and stalled. Polite and patient. Another voice cut in over speaker. Sharper. "We authorized the patch. Why isn't it moving?" A chair scraped. Someone cursed under their breath. I could hear keyboards. The frantic rhythm of people trying to force a door that wasn't locked. It simply wasn't theirs. Funds were entering escrow and stopping there. No errors, no alarms, just a pause on where motion used to be. The kind that makes executives nervous because there's nothing to blame. "Get me the override." Someone snapped. A beat, then a softer answer, almost apologetic. "There isn't one." They tried again. I watched the attempt register and die quietly. The weekly digital signature was missing. Without it, the escrow bank wouldn't release a cent. Liability rules didn't care about urgency or titles. "How do you explain this to the board?" another voice asked. Too fast. I thought about how many times I'd warned them this wasn't a switch you could flip. How governance lived upstream, long before code. How confidence had replaced curiosity. What kind of system keeps running while everything important freezes? A new call buzzed in. I didn't answer. A message followed, then another, each shorter than the last. The dashboard ticked over with notices from the bank standard language. Non-negotiable tone. Funds protected. Flows suspended pending authorization. Someone tried to laugh it off. The sound cracked. Someone else asked if we could just wait it out until next week. The room on the other end went quiet when that idea landed. I closed the laptop and stood. The pause would spread next, from customers to partners to anyone who needed money to move today. Not eventually. My phone kept lighting up as I headed for the door. The pressure building with every unanswered ring. My phone didn't stop vibrating. It wasn't panic yet. It was recognition. The first email came from a fund manager who never emailed. "Your profile disappeared from the company site. Is that a mistake?" No greeting, no signature, just the question. A second followed before I could answer. "Our risk system flagged a key person event. We need clarity." The words were polite. The timing wasn't. I opened the monitoring console and watched alerts stack themselves. Clean and automatic. The company page updated. My name gone. My photo replaced with a stock headshot under Ethan's title. Somewhere in it, a script did exactly what it was designed to do. A call broke through. I answered this one. "You're not listed anymore," the voice said. Tight. Tell me that's cosmetic. I didn't rush. It means they made a decision. A breath on the line. We can't operate blind. Another call joined, then another. Different accents. Same edge. No one asked how I felt. They asked if their money was safe. What scares investors more than downtime? An assistant's voice cut in from one call. Trying to keep control. We've reached out to leadership. Someone laughed, sharp and short. Leadership isn't who built the engine. I felt the balance tip. Not dramatically, just enough. 24 hours after the site change. The first suspension notice landed, then the next. Standard language again? Operations paused pending explanation from the technical representative. My screen filled with requests addressed to me by name. Not Vanessa, not Ethan, me. A message popped up from internal legal. Forwarded twice. Clients are asking for you specifically. We need you on a call. The typing bubble lingered, then vanished. I typed one line back and left it unsent. The room on the other end could wait. The market had already spoken, and it wasn't interested in titles. The calls kept coming as I locked my phone and picked up my bag. Pressure like this doesn't dissipate. It concentrates. And once it does, someone always reaches for the person who knows where the valves are. The press call went live without me. I watched the stream on mute. Ethan framed perfectly from the chest up. Tie straight, posture practiced, his mouth moved in smooth lines. Confidence came easily to him. It always had. Words like stability and forward momentum scrolled past in real time as quotes. Someone off-screen fed him prompts. He nodded at the right moments, paused for effect, smiled when it was safe. Behind the scenes, my phone lit up with messages from people who didn't buy it. They're asking for a liquidity timeline. One read, another followed. Bank wants confirmation on the multi-signature. Ethan leaned closer to the mic. What we're seeing is a temporary liquidity adjustment while we align systems. The phrase landed heavy and hollow. No numbers. No commitments. Just air. A call broke through from a compliance officer I recognized by voice alone. We need the hardware authorization. Today, I let the silence stretch long enough to feel the weight of it shift. That's not something he can approve. I said, a pause. Then, quieter. We know. On the screen, Ethan fielded a question about safeguards. His answer ran long and circled back to Vision. Somewhere in the building, someone realized Vision didn't unlock escrow accounts. Can charisma replace competence when the system starts asking questions? Another message buzzed in. This one from a senior banker. We can't proceed without all signatories. Physical verification is required. My fingers brushed the small device hanging at my collarbone. I'd worn it for years without thinking. Habit. Access. Proof. Ethan's voice rose slightly. Just enough to signal strain. He promised updates. He promised transparency. He promised nothing that could be enforced. The call ended. The feed cut to a holding screen. My phone rang immediately after. A number I recognize now because it hadn't stopped trying. I didn't answer yet. Pressure like this needs a place to land. And right now, everyone was still looking in the wrong direction. The phone finally rang just after midnight. I was still awake, the screen lighting up the room before the sound did. Vanessa's name sat there. Steady, confident, like it still belonged to her. I answered without greeting. You're holding my company hostage. The words came out fast, sharpened by hours of pressure. I could hear other voices in the background, muffled, arguing over each other. I let her finish breathing. No, you bought my freedom for $100. I'm simply no longer your emergency service. A chair scraped on her end. Someone whispered something she didn't repeat. This stops now. She said, you turn it back on, and we'll talk about compensation. Compensation was the bill you slid across the table. I said, this is governance. She exhaled hard. You don't get to decide governance. I didn't. I said, you did, 3 years ago. Page 14. You signed? Silence. Then paper shifting. A keyboard tapping too fast. I pictured her scanning, not reading, looking for an escape hatch that wasn't there. You're exploiting a technicality, she said. It's a compliance trigger. I said, automatic, non-negotiable. The moment you terminated the technical representative without a transition, the license status changed. Banks don't care about intent. Someone in the room raised their voice. She covered the phone for a second, came back colder. If this isn't blackmail, what do you call it? Process doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't threaten, it just keeps going. You called me? I said, not the other way around. Her control cracked then. Just enough. The board wants a call. Now. I'm available. I said, with them. Not under you. Another pause. This one longer. When she spoke again, the room behind her was quiet. Send the terms. I will, I said, when they're on the line. The call ended without goodbye. I set the phone down and watched the screen fade to black, already knowing the next conversation wouldn't happen in private. They chose the lobby on purpose. The same marble floor. The same long desk where visitors checked in. The same place where Vanessa had stood, smiling, and told me not to come back. Security didn't stop me this time. Someone nodded and stepped aside. The board was already seated when I arrived. No small talk. No pleasantries. Vanessa stood at the edge of the group, arms crossed, jaw set. Ethan took a chair too quickly and then didn't touch the table in front of him. A screen lit up behind them. Numbers scrolled. Red markers blinked. We're out of time, one of the directors said, leaning forward. We need terms. I didn't open my laptop. I spoke without notes. Emergency license reinstatement? I said, board-level contract, independent authority. The fee reflects the risk you triggered. Vanessa cut in. This is extortion. No one looked at her. Another director tapped the table. Say the number. 9 figures. I said, payable immediately. Ethan laughed once. Sharp. You can't be serious. The laughter didn't spread. Someone on the far end slid a tablet across the table toward him. He stopped smiling as he read, what does an insult cost once interest is applied? Operational control changes today. I continued. Effective now. Ethan is removed from all system-facing decisions. Vanessa stepped forward. You don't get to decide who runs my company. A pen clicked. The chair turned slightly away from her. We do, the director said. And we're voting. The decision didn't take long. Paper moved. A document landed in front of Vanessa. Her hands shook when she picked up the pen. She signed anyway. I reached into my pocket and unfolded the bill she'd given me. The edges were worn now. I placed it in the center of the table. Coffee, I said, pushing it toward the assistant hovering nearby. For everyone. No one stopped me. Vanessa stared at the bill like she recognized it for the first time. Ethan stood up, then sat back down when no one followed. I gathered my things and turned toward the elevators. Behind me, voices rose again, already shifting from blame to logistics. The system would breathe soon. The cost had been agreed to. The rules had changed. The lights on the dashboard went green one by one, not all at once. Someone on the other end exhaled, loud enough to be heard through the speaker. Another voice cut in, clipped and relieved. Funds moved, queues cleared. The room settled into a different kind of noise, the sound of work resuming under watch. A message popped up from Treasury. Release confirmed. Another followed from compliance. Status normalized. I closed the window before the relief could turn into celebration. Ethan's name stopped appearing on invites. Not removed with an announcement. Just absent. Chairs filled without him. Questions went unanswered and then stopped being asked when he did pass through the corridor later. He kept his phone up, eyes fixed on a screen that didn't need him anymore. Legal reached out next. No greeting. A document attached. The subject line was precise. Independent architecture engagement. I scanned the terms and sent back a single change. They accepted it without comment. When I walked back into the building, the badge worked. But no one looked relieved to see me. A few people nodded. Most didn't. The ones who used to stop by my desk for advice stayed seated. Hands busy, eyes forward. You're not staff, someone said quietly as I passed. Not accusing, just stating a boundary. Correct. I replied, and kept moving. In the conference room, a director asked for a timeline. I gave one. Another asked for safeguards. I listed them. The questions were sharper now, stripped of charm. I answered them anyway. What do you lose when you stop needing approval? An assistant handed me a coffee without asking how I took it. I didn't thank her. Not because I was angry, but because gratitude felt like an invitation. As I left for the day, my phone buzzed with a calendar hold marked governance review. Tomorrow, early. I didn't decline it. I didn't accept either. I slid the phone into my pocket and headed for the elevator, already planning what would need to change next. The governance meeting ended without raised voices. Vanessa sat at the far end of the table this time, hands folded, listening more than speaking. When she did talk, it was brief, careful. No one deferred to her. They looked at the document instead, the one with my signature where it mattered. Operational authority remains external. A director said, eyes on the page. Any changes require written notice. Vanessa nodded once. No argument. No smile. The pen stayed still in front of her when the meeting broke. People filtered out in pairs. Conversation stayed low. Someone paused near me, then kept walking. Another lingered, opened their mouth, thought better of it. Respect had replaced familiarity. It was quieter, heavier. The elevator doors closed behind me. The mirror caught my reflection as we descended. Tired, steady, unchanged in ways that mattered. I reached into my pocket and felt the folded bill, thin as paper, heavier than it should have been. Later that evening, a message came through from legal confirming the final transfer of oversight. Clean language, clear boundaries, no sentiment attached. I replied with a single line acknowledging receipt and shut the laptop. I wasn't the star employee anymore. I wasn't the one people clapped for at all-hands meetings or quoted in press releases. I was the operator, the one who decided how things ran and when they stopped. That line felt solid when I said it to myself. Here's the lesson I took with me. If you let people define your value for you, they will always choose the cheapest number. When you build something real, protect it. And don't confuse access with ownership. Thanks for staying with me through this. If any part of it felt familiar, I'd like to hear what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this help you draw clearer lines for yourself, feel free to stick around for the next one. The sentence cut through the room while my mouth was still forming the word risk. I had been mid-explanation, fingers resting on the edge of the table, eyes moving from face to face as I walked them through allocation thresholds, the part nobody rushed, the part that decided whether a $1.9 billion agreement lived or died. Then the door opened hard enough to shift the air. Vivian didn't hurry. She never did. Her heels stopped beside the table, not behind me, not politely out of the way, but squarely in the line of sight of 13 global partners who had flown in to finish this. Chicago winter pressed against the glass behind them. Gray sky. Frozen river. Wind tapping the windows like it wanted in. Thank you, Callista. We'll take it from here. A pause, long enough to make sure every ear was tuned. You're no longer needed. Security will escort you out. No one moved. Pens hovered above paper. A laptop screen dimmed. Someone at the far end exhaled through their nose and didn't bother hiding it. This wasn't confusion. This was calculation. My name is Callista. I am 42 years old. The thought landed steady, almost clinical, the way it does when adrenaline sharpens everything instead of scattering it. I'd spent years in rooms like this, years learning when to speak and when silence did more damage than words ever could. I looked down at the documents spread in front of me, then at the faces around the table. Not one of them met Vivian's eyes. Not one of them reached for a pen. She waited for me to react. I could feel it, the slight tilt of her head, the confidence of someone already picturing the headline, the bonus. The story she planned to tell about stepping in at the last moment to save the deal? I didn't give her that moment. I gathered my notes. Slow enough to make the pause uncomfortable. Deliberate enough to remind the room who had been guiding them until 10 seconds ago. My old fountain pen slid into my palm. Familiar weight. A habit I'd never broken. At the far side of the table, the oldest CEO there watched me with something close to recognition. I gave him a small nod and stepped back from the chair I'd been sitting in all morning. If you've ever felt power shift without a sound, you know exactly how that room felt then. I walked toward the door without looking at Vivian again. Aware of how quickly ambition had mistaken certainty for control, and wondering why she would choose this exact moment to erase the one person holding the room together. A small note before I go on this story is a work created by the writing team at Revenge AITA. The door closed behind me. Inside, no signatures moved. No one rushed to fill the silence I left behind. That was the first thing I noticed. Not confusion, not outrage, just stillness. Measured and deliberate, like everyone in the room had agreed without saying a word to pause and reassess the math. Pens hovered above signature lines. 2 laptops closed halfway, screens dimmed but not shut. The universal signal for not yet. Along the wall, a pair of legal advisors leaned toward each other. Voices too low to catch. Eyes flicking between Vivian and the empty chair I had just stepped away from. Vivian cleared her throat. Let's continue. The confidence was still there, but it had thinned. She moved closer to the head of the table. Hands braced against the leather back of my chair as if proximity alone could transfer authority. A voice from the left, calm and unhurried. Before we do, who's confirming the risk assurances discussed moments ago? Vivian's fingers tightened. The company stands by. That wasn't the question. Another chair shifted. Someone capped a pen and set it down, square in the center of their folder. Not closed, not signed. I slid my papers into my bag, slow enough to be noticed. The fountain pen went in last. Habit. Control. At the far end, the oldest CEO, their silver hair. Eyes sharp from decades of watching deals rise and rot caught my glance. The corner of his mouth lifted. Just barely. Not sympathy. Recognition. I stepped back, giving the room space to feel the gap I'd left. In places like this, how a company treats the person holding the threads matters more than any slide deck. Everyone knew it. Vivian knew it too. She just hadn't expected it to matter right now. Was this what losing looked like? Or was this the moment everyone realized the equation had changed? Vivian tried again. Voice firmer. We've covered the framework. There's no reason to delay. No one reached for a pen. I walked toward the door without being escorted. The sound of my shoes, the only thing moving. Behind me, someone asked for a brief pause. Another voice agreed. The door closed softly, but the pressure didn't lift. It followed me into the hallway. Thick and unresolved. The kind that doesn't fade, it waits. I didn't need to hear Vivian explain herself to understand what she thought she was doing. The hallway outside the conference room had gone quiet, but my phone hadn't. A message buzzed in from Martin, one of our internal finance directors. Short and clipped. She's positioning this as a leadership takeover, board visibility, bonus cycle tied to close. No sympathy, just confirmation. So that was it. Vivian hadn't cut me loose out of anger. She'd done it because she believed the hardest part was already behind us. The structure built, the resistance softened. The numbers lined up. In her mind, all that remained was the signature and the spotlight. Inside that room, she saw me as the person who walked through slides, the voice that explained things clearly, the face the partners had grown used to seeing at the table. Replaceable. What she never stopped to question was why those 13 executives' competitors in every other context had agreed to sit in the same room without tearing the deal apart. They didn't trust the company. They didn't trust each other. They trusted continuity. They trusted the person who had kept promises consistent when pressure mounted, who remembered concessions made 6 months ago and enforced them quietly, who never shifted language to suit a headline. That wasn't something you transferred by taking a chair. My phone buzzed again, this time a single line from an unfamiliar number. Is Vivian authorized to restate the assurances you made earlier? No greeting, no signature. Just a test. I slowed my steps and let the question sit unanswered. If I was just a presenter, why were they already checking whether the table still held behind me? The conference room door opened. Vivian's voice carried into the hall. Tight now? Layered with insistence. We're aligned. There's no need to reopen. A deeper voice cut in. Calm and unimpressed. Alignment isn't the issue. I turned before the door closed again, catching a glimpse of bodies leaning back instead of forward. Hands moving away from paper. The deal wasn't collapsing yet. It was hesitating. And hesitation, at this level, was never accidental. The chair scraped softly as Vivian pulled it out and sat where I had been moments earlier. She didn't look around for permission. She didn't need to. Her hand moved straight to the folder in front of her, flipping to the last page with practiced confidence. The pen was already uncapped when a voice from across the table broke the motion. Before that, the interruption wasn't sharp. It didn't need to be. It came from the German CEO posture relaxed. Hands folded as if this were routine housekeeping rather than a pivot point. Vivian froze just long enough to be noticed. Who is legally confirming the verbal commitments Callista made 10 minutes ago? The pen hovered, not shaking, just suspended. Vivian leaned back slightly. Buying time. Those commitments were made on behalf of the company. That still doesn't answer the question. A second voice joined in, quieter. From the right, some of those assurances were conditional. Another pause. Papers stopped moving. Along the wall, one of the legal advisors set his pen down flat and slid his notebook closed halfway. Across from him, his counterpart mirrored the motion without looking up. Vivian straightened. I can restate the position. You can restate it, the German CEO replied, calm and precise. But can you confirm it? The distinction landed. I felt it even from the hallway, like a pressure change. Vivian's gaze flicked to the empty space where I had been sitting, then back to the table. Her jaw tightened. I'm authorized to finalize this deal. A chair shifted. Another executive leaned back, arms crossing. Authorization isn't the same as continuity. Was this the moment she realized the room no longer belonged to her? The pen lowered to the table without touching the page. No one reached for theirs. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was procedural. Vivian tried again. Voice firmer. We've spent months aligning on this, and months relying on the same point of contact. Someone else added. Tone neutral. Impossible to argue with. I watched through the narrow glass panel as Vivian's confidence thinned into something sharper, more brittle. She wasn't losing control yet, but she was no longer directing the pace. Inside the room, the deal waited. So did the question she couldn't answer. I didn't step back into the room. I didn't need to. The words reached me anyway, carried through the glass and the thin strip of open space near the door. A legal voice this time. Flat. Careful. The kind that never raises itself unless it has to. There is a clause relevant to the situation. Vivian turned in her chair. I could see it from the hallway, the sharp movement, the sudden attention. Which clause a page slid across the table? Someone cleared their throat, not to speak louder, but to make sure the room stayed quiet. The key person provision. The reading began. No emphasis, no drama, just text. This agreement remains valid only upon confirmation by the designated lead negotiator at the final session. A pause followed. Not hesitation, recognition. Another voice, lower, and the designated individual. The page shifted again. A finger traced a line. Stopped. Callista. My name didn't echo. It didn't need to. It landed exactly where it was supposed to. Vivian leaned forward. Her hand reached for the folder. Flipping pages too fast now. Eyes scanning for something she'd missed. The confidence she'd walked in with didn't vanish. It cracked. That was worse. Cracks spread. I can confirm on behalf of the company. She pressed. That's a formality. That's an assumption. Came back immediately. And not one we agreed to. Someone else spoke up. Measured. The clause was non-negotiable. We accepted it because of continuity. Vivian's mouth opened, then closed. She looked toward the door again. Toward the space where I wasn't standing. Had she really thought removing me would leave the structure intact? A chair shifted. Another pen was set down. Deliberately. Parallel to the page. Across the table. A legal advisor tapped the margin once, signaling the end of discussion. The confirmation hasn't occurred. He said, which means the agreement hasn't either. I felt the weight of it settle. Not triumph. Not relief. Just certainty. Vivian hadn't fired a problem. She'd pulled the pin. Inside the room, the paper stayed unsigned, and no one reached for the door yet. The first chair moved without drama. It wasn't pushed back hard, just enough to signal intent. The CEO nearest the window stood, jacket already buttoned, eyes never leaving the table. Another followed, then another. The sound of leather shifting, replacing any argument that might have come next. Vivian lifted a hand. We can resolve this. No one sat back down. A voice from the far side cut through. Even and controlled. Resolution requires stability. Another added, quieter but firmer. Stability requires predictability. Phones began to vibrate, not all at once. One, then two, a third. Answered under the table with a glance that tightened into something sharper. A legal advisor leaned in and murmured a single line to his client. The client nodded and closed the folder without touching the pen. Vivian stepped away from the table, trying to intercept momentum with proximity. The fundamentals haven't changed. They have, someone replied, already moving toward the door. Leadership volatility is a material risk. The word risk landed heavy. It always did. My own phone buzzed in my pocket. A market alert flashed across the screen. Numbers moving the wrong direction fast enough to be noticed. The room felt smaller as reality caught up to it. efficient and indifferent. Was this how quickly confidence turned into caution at this level? Vivian's voice rose, not loud enough to be a shout, but pitched higher than before. Walking away now creates exposure. A brief pause, then, from near the exit, staying creates more. That was the last exchange that mattered. One by one, they left. No slamming doors, no accusations, just calculated distance. The kind that protects capital and reputations without drawing attention to itself. The table was left with untouched water glasses and unsigned pages aligned too neatly to be accidental. A legal advisor gathered his materials. Expression neutral, already thinking ahead. Vivian remained standing. Hands braced against the table she no longer controlled. I stayed where I was, just outside the room, listening to the absence settle. The deal hadn't exploded. It had simply been withdrawn, quietly, by people who knew exactly when to stop pretending certainty still existed. Behind the glass, Vivian stared at the empty chairs, the weight of them finally registering. In front of me, the hallway filled with footsteps moving in one direction away. What's worse than being yelled at in public, being left alone after everyone has decided you're no longer worth arguing with? I stayed near the doorway as the last of them filed out. No one rushed. No one looked back. Chairs were pushed in with care, like this room might still matter later. Just not right now. Vivian stood at the center of it, hands pressed flat against the table, shoulders stiff. She didn't call after them. She didn't apologize. There was nothing left that would change the direction of their feet. One of the CEOs slowed when he reached me. Older. Precise. He didn't offer words, just his hand. I took it. The grip was firm, brief, deliberate. The kind that says we'll talk without promising anything out loud. When he let go, he turned and followed the others down the corridor, already dialing someone on his phone. Vivian finally looked up. Our eyes met for half a second. Whatever she expected to find, their anger, satisfaction, panic, she didn't. I wasn't guarding anything. I wasn't celebrating. I was waiting. This didn't have to happen, she said. It wasn't an apology. It was an attempt to rewrite the last hour into something manageable. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder. It already did. She took a step toward me, then stopped. The room behind her was too quiet now. No movement. No witnesses. Just the weight of what had emptied out. If the deal was gone, why did it feel like my leverage had just begun? I turned before she could say anything else. Not out of restraint, out of timing. There are moments when staying gives the other person too much space to reshape the story. As I walked away, my phone vibrated again. Not a market alert this time. A name. One I recognized from the table. I didn't answer yet. Some conversations are better taken when you're already moving forward. I took one sip and set the glass down. The phone lit up before the taste settled. Then again, and again. Same pattern. Different names. None of them Vivian. I turned the screen face down. It buzzed anyway. Insistent. Like it didn't care whether I was ready or not. A man a few stools down glanced over, then looked away. Everyone in places like this knows when not to ask questions. I answered the third call. We won't be continuing with her company, the voice said. Calm. Already past the drama. That decision is final. I leaned back against the bar. That was fast. It was overdue. Another vibration cut in. I let it go. The caller stayed on the line. Waiting. You're forming something. He continued. Not a question. Independent. Advisory. I'm considering it. Then let's be clear. A pause. We don't want a new firm. We want continuity. I ended the call and immediately answered the next. Different accent. Same message. We're aligned, this one said, but alignment requires a single point of accountability, which you no longer have, I replied, which we'd like to restore. Was this what it looked like when trust detached itself from a logo and followed a person instead? I finally silenced the phone and picked up the glass again. The ice had melted. I didn't mind. My thoughts were moving faster now, stacking options, pressure points, consequences. Another call slipped through before the silence held. I answered without looking. If you're calling to apologize, I began. You're late. A short breath on the other end. I'm calling to ask what your terms would be. That changed the temperature. I didn't answer right away. I didn't have to. The balance had shifted enough that hesitation worked in my favor now. I'll let you know, I said, and ended it. The phone stayed quiet after that, not because there was nothing left to say, but because everyone understood the next move wasn't theirs. I stood, slid a bill across the counter, and picked up my bag. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be a reaction. I didn't sleep. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and started a clean document. Name, structure, scope, authority. By the time the sun hinted at showing up, the firm existed on paper and in my head. Independent, advisory, no titles borrowed, no committees to appease. The first call came before I finished the second paragraph. We need a single point. The voice pressed, clipped and practical. Someone who can commit without looping back to a board. I don't answer to one anymore. A pause. Then, good. Another line rang in. Then another. Each conversation shorter than the last. Less convincing. More confirming. The leverage was real now. Not theoretical. I drafted one email and stared at it longer than necessary. One sentence. No greeting. No softening. I can salvage this. My fee is 10% of the total value, and I hold veto power over the board. I sent it to Vivian and closed the laptop. What would you ask for if you never had to beg for a seat again? My phone buzzed almost immediately. I let it ring. When it stopped, a message followed 3 words, then a backspace, then nothing. Another call came in, this time from a number I recognized from the table. We've reviewed your terms, he said once I answered. They're firm. They're necessary and non-negotiable. That's what firm means. A breath on the other end. Then we proceed. I hung up and opened the document again, added dates, added safeguards, removed anything that smelled like compromise for the sake of comfort. Another vibration. Vivian this time. I watched it light up and go dark. Watched it try again. I didn't block her. I didn't need to. Silence was clearer than any refusal. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. The day had finally decided what it was going to be. There was one meeting left to attend. And this time, I was setting the agenda. The room looked the same when I walked in a week later. Same table, same seats, same folders stacked in the center. What changed was where I stopped. I took the chair at the head without asking. No one corrected me. Across the table, faces settled, familiar and unreadable. The kind of attention that waits for direction instead of permission. At the edge of the room, Vivian stood with her hands clasped, saying nothing. She had learned when silence no longer worked in her favor. A folder slid toward me. I opened it, skimmed the final page, then set it back down. Confirm the revisions. A pen tapped once. Confirmed. Another voice followed. Steady. Risk language aligns with the last session. Then proceed. 13 pens moved together. Not rushed, not ceremonial, just coordinated. Like people who had already decided. Paper shifted. Pages turned. The sound was quiet but decisive. The kind that leaves no space for doubt. Vivian took a step forward, then stopped. No one looked up. She stayed where she was, watching the work continue without her. When the last signature was in place, a hand extended toward me with the document. I signed and capped the pen. No applause followed. No speeches. The meeting ended the way it should have ended the first time. I stood and gathered my things. Vivian's eyes met mine for a moment. Whatever she wanted to say stayed unspoken. It wasn't needed anymore. Before I left, I paused long enough to let the room settle. We move forward under these terms. If they change, we pause. If trust breaks, we stop. Heads nodded. Not out of agreement, out of understanding. Here's the lesson I'm taking with me. If you let people cross your boundaries to keep the peace, they will keep crossing them. The moment you protect your position, the right people adjust and the wrong ones remove themselves. Thank you for staying with this story. If it hit close to home, I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if stories about boundaries, work, and finding your footing matter to you, stick around and follow along. I'll be here.